Hello. Just making a video just as a kind of a quick tutorial for my Cel Shader, because a number of people have been asking for one, and I guess it wasn't entirely clear exactly how to use it just from the documentation. So here we are. It's not going to be super in-depth, because there are a lot of options to play with, but I just to like give you the gist of it and help people figure out how to actually use the thing. Now, to start, in this folder here, we have our master materials. This is just the default third-person example template with the cell shader imported into it. And so first off, we have this cell shade. Uh, the simple one, I think, is going to be good for most people. It's easier to use, it's faster to compile, it's more performant. I- it's just good enough for most things. The main cell shade material is it has a lot more features, but it's going to take a lot longer to compile. It's just going to be a lot more to look at and configure if you're not entirely sure what you're doing. So for most people, I think just use the simple one. So just going to create a material instance of that and call it cell mannequin, and just throw that in the mannequin folder here and open that up. And over here, um, just want to throw a texture on there. The default mannequin texture isn't really something we want to use. It's this weird color thing because the default mannequin here does some weird stuff with materials. So we I kind of made a version of that, which is actually in the demonstration content here. This texture that I'm just going to use, and so I'll click here, use texture. Click the texture and then just set it to that. That takes a little bit to compile. Um, but why? Oh, there it is. So now we have that, and I'll just go ahead and apply that to our mannequin right here. If I here, um, oh, just browse to that and then apply it there. It's not really being applied to. Is it being applied to his? No, it's not. We're not going to really worry about this little U right now. But the main thing is the rest of them has it. And so you can kind of see, just close that, how it affects him. There are a lot of settings to play with. We can use a normal map. Let's actually go ahead and do that. Where is his normal map? Textures here, his normals. We'll just set that in, and now you can kind of see where there's a little bit more detail on him from the normal map. And so you can play with some of these like shadow, color, offsets, brightness, and whatnot. Um, there are diffuse settings here if I want to like set that and then maybe um, turn down the brightness of because the cell shader is by default emissive. If you only use the cell shader part, so this is like he won't receive shadows. Like if I just say take a cube and put it in the scene above him. Oh, hold on. You can see it's not casting a shadow on him. However, if I turn up the diffuse and actually maybe turn down the brightness, Now it is casting a shadow on him, and you can see that there. Um, Wait, shoot. Is it? Yeah, there we go. So you can see it there, where it's casting a shadow, and if we just have no diffuse with no brightness, then he's black. But um, now you can see that it's not casting any shadow. So important thing to understand with the cell shader, when you're using pure cell shading with this system, shadows are entirely based on light angle. They do not receive shadows cast by other things. So if you want that, then you need to have this diffuse on. Of course, kind of the downside of that is if you want a pure cell shaded look, then this will kind of mess with that a bit, and the like the shadows might not be exactly the way you would expect them to. So um, there's not a whole lot that you can do if you want like that pure, like with the brightness set to 0 and the diffuse set all the way to 1, then this is kind of like just regular shading, it's not really like a cell shaded look much at all. You just have this weird effect here from the shadow. I could actually turn the shadow brightness. If I set the shadow brightness up to 2, then you actually can't even see it at all. You can actually set it even higher. Um, but you know, but you can play with those values and see what gets you an effect that you want. Metallic roughness and specular um, options are here too if you want to mess with those, though you aren't. I mean, I don't really use those. I like to have it just at the default for any sort of cell shading. And if you wanted to say add like maps for any of these, you could just open up the your master materials cell shader, and you could just like put a map in here if you want, like for any of these values. Just put in a texture value or in like maybe a static switch or something, so you can enable or disable the texture. If you know how to like edit materials, like you could just do something exactly like this, where you have a static switch for like use metallic and whatever. Eh, I mean, if you know what I'm talking about, then you probably already know how to do that. But anyway, that's an option if you so choose. It's not hard to like. You can edit these if you want to suit your particular needs. Um, I kind of made them that way. Like I just threw in a bunch of features that I thought that I could potentially need or use for various things. Um, and if you feel like you need something specific that isn't in there, go ahead and throw it in and have fun. Fresnel is here too, just for having a nice kind of edge light. If you want that, a little bit hard to see at the moment. Maybe if I turn down the brightness, be a little. I can just turn up this brightness, like say 10 something or 100, something really noticeable. Maybe raise the exponent a bit so it's a little bit more limited to the edges, but that creates a kind of a nice edge light effect if you want that. Um, if you want it to be, affected by the sorry, by like the direction that the light is hitting. So maybe you want the edge light only on the lit part and you don't want it to show up on the shaded part of the mesh. You could mask that out. I actually did answer a question on the product page recently about that, and I might include that as a feature in a future update. But yeah, that's very doable. Um, just a few features here in this simple cell shader material, but for now, let's just um, change this. So here's your cell shaded mannequin, right? You can adjust the offset here. To make the shadow like cover more or less, depending on what you want, you can do this with a specular too. Make the specular cover more or less. A little bit hard to see, maybe if I increase the brightness, or like, yeah, even make it like real bright like that so it's super obvious. Um, you can have it cover more or less. Like maybe even give it just like a slight shimmer or whatever you want to do with it. You can of course change the color if you so choose. Um, but totally up to you. Maybe the color might show through a little bit better if it isn't so bright. Um, Maybe not so great, but you can tell it's there. It depends on the color that it's on top of. Like you can see this green is a lot more apparent here than it is here. Um, you have more control over this sort of thing in the main material. So again, like the simple material is good for the most part. Like if you just leave it set to white, it probably works a little bit better in most cases, um, because it is affected by the underlying color, as you would normally expect it to be. Um, but yeah, and I mean, of course, the Fresnel also has a color option if you wanted to, change the color of the Fresnel, like maybe just give it like a blue glow outline. You can just do stuff like that. Um, but yeah, I mean, like you can obviously change the shadow color to, if you wanted to, change the shadow brightness even. 0 will just make it pure black. You can even make it glow if you want to, just by using values bigger than 1. 1 will just be solid color. You can make it darker, lighter. Just play around with that. And you can create some neat effects like this if you want. Like even like change the specular color maybe to something like this, just something ridiculously bright. I don't know, just have an effect like that. Um, and now at this point, I should also go over the lighting, like the what controls the light direction. Um, for that, we actually have a blueprint. Not there. That's not. Where is it? Oh, here? No, I just looked in there. Sorry. Here, cel shade light blueprints. There we go. Just throw one of these in the scene, and you can tell that it just got a little bit weird there. Oh yes, you also might want to, so you can actually see right now there's some soft shading here that you might not want. That is actually from ambient occlusion. And if you don't want that, you can either go into your post-process volume and find ambient occlusion and set that intensity to 0, and that'll fix that. Now we just have a completely flat color. You can also do that, I think, in your project settings, um, somewhere in here. Yeah, and just disable ambient occlusion. And then no matter what this is, oh no. Oh, there we go. So yeah, no matter what this is set to now, it just won't have it. So you can disable it project wide or disable it in your post-process volume. Either way, it achieves that effect. So now it's just a flat color. But you can see now that after I threw that light into the scene, now it's lighting his backside and not his front. That's because of the direction that this is facing, which you should be able to, yeah, this red arrow here is what shows the direction. You can rotate that. And there you go. So this is basically a directional light, and there are some settings here. And most of these settings aren't really used for the simple cell shader. A lot of these are just for the main cell shader, which again has more options to it. Um, like the color option and everything, it just doesn't really do anything here. You can see that. As a matter of fact, I don't think any of these, even the intensity, yeah, none of these actually. Well, the disable film tone mapper, I should probably mention. This disables. So Unreal Engine has this tone mapper by default that kind of, to me, makes a lot of the colors look washed out. Probably be a little bit easier if I turn down the specular on. I just kind of reset that to the default there. Um, to me, it makes, yeah, this is with it, this option enabled, kind of makes the colors look a little bit better. I mean, as it is, it also makes the specular a little harder to see, so I might say turn down the brightness there just a tad if I want that to be a little more apparent. Just whatever I would want that as. I can, customize that as I choose. But anyway, that's just an option if you want to disable that tone mapping that Unreal has by default. Just to make the colors pop a little bit more, because I turn that off and it's like these colors look really dull to me, and that's just a little bit better. It's just there as a quick option, um, and I think it helps. And I get so there. That's kind of all there is to really go over for this simple cell shader. If I grab the so now let's make one based on the. If I go back to our master materials, or I even have like default. I have like examples here in the material instances folder. Um, if I like just duplicate this and call it cell mannequin, I don't know, that's what I call the other one, full, because I forgot to name the other one as simple. But either way, I'll just again throw that in the mannequin folder, and set that to our mannequin's material. And this one will take much longer to compile in general, because there are a lot more instructions to compile. So I probably won't mess with too many of these options in this tutorial, just because it takes a long time to go through everything and recompile everything and all that. So um, it's a lot to experiment with. So if you want to, experiment with these options, by all means, go ahead. I'll just real quick, just put a texture on here. Let's see if I can find, no, where did I have that? Demonstration, mannequin texture. There. And I'll give him his normal map too. Is that the right one? Yeah. And It's not really showing, probably because it's still compiling. Um, but yes, you can see there are far more options here. Options like using vertex colors to control the shadow threshold, which is similar to something that Guilty Gear XR uses to like have certain parts of the mesh more easily lit or shaded than others to, have more defined shadows. And so that's like kind of more advanced. You would need to actually do that within the uh, like actual mesh that you're editing in your 3D editor. You would need to actually give it vertex colors and use it to control that. Like you could like use specific channels, like say use the blue channel to control how easily shaded something is, and uh, that would it's a little bit hard to explain. There are like videos about how Guilty Gear does it. I don't really have a good example of that right here because it's just the mannequin that I'm working with right now. But basically, it'll let you define parts of the mesh that are more easily shadowed. Um, you can do that with like both shadow and specular. You could even potentially use it for other values if you wanted to, like if you want to just go into the material functions and edit them to do that sort of thing for other values. It's again, you can edit it to do what you want. This just has a lot of features that I could see myself using. We also have these light channels. So this material, unlike the other one, actually uses multiple channels. You can have multiple cell shade lights in here. The default is directional, so you can see, rotating this as directional. Let me actually just lower his emissive to like 0.8 or something, and then maybe adjust the specular offset. So we have a little bit of specular on here, just something so that we can actually see it. Maybe a little less, but some. And, you know, now we have some specular and some shadow. Now this can act as, right now it's a directional light. We have some different light types here. And either as this can act as a point light too, where instead of the rotation, it uses the location. So it's a different type of light where I mean, if you understand lights in Unreal, it's a similar concept. Directional light, it doesn't matter where the light is physically located. It's only the rotation that matters. Whereas a point light, it's only the location, not the rotation that matters. Although you can also have a limited fall off distance. So for example, oh yeah, and I can change the color here too and it only affects the lit part. Um, if you wanted to say have a light color. You can also have the shadow light say only affect the shadow here, which doesn't really work if that's the only thing that's there. But I mean, there are options here too to control how shadows are colored. Like I think you actually need to use a non-black shadow color in order for it to be affected by yeah, see now we're actually getting a purple on that shadow, but there's no directional light. So let's actually copy that, and we need to set it to a different channel. So let's set that to channel 1 and set it to a directional light. And now we can say change the color on the shadow light, And now we have this orange shadow with this purple light, and we can, in fact, increase the light intensity if we want to like make it real bright, like super bright. We probably don't want to do that, but I mean, like that's just an example if you wanted to do anything along those lines. But other than that, you have this kind of control over colors based on the lights themselves. Um, Other light types too. An area light will just like fill the area with light. You know, it's not. Um, if I actually disable this light, so now it just makes the whole thing. Well, if I actually turn this back on, you can see it affects not just the shaded part, but also the well, specifically the lit part, I guess. But it'll fill the area instead of only like affecting the lit part. But I mean, it does affect. Sorry, it's a little hard for me to actually explain it like this, but you know, you can experiment with it and mess around. A spotlight too we have where uh, you know, it's basically a point light but with a specific radius. So you can see how when I move it, it's a little bit hard to really. It'll help if I actually put in like say a floor here and just like scale up or scale down just scale it and then give it the let's just throw this material on it, and now it's actually being affected by the light. And so you can see a little more clearly here how the spotlight affects it. Where it's actually affected by both rotation and location. Um, Another thing too is we can have like a fall off distance, like I mentioned. So let's just turn that off and set this to um, just a point light. And this works with any type of light, but specifically right now we're using a point light. I just move him up a little bit so he's actually above the floor. Um, and let's just set this, let's actually go ahead and, you know, just for the heck of it, um, open this and set that diffuse color to something a little higher so that like, and probably reduce the emissive just a smidge or like by half. So now we're actually receiving a shadow. So that's probably better to have like on your environments, just so it actually, you know, receives shadows, because it's a little weird when we're not casting shadows, but so that helps. Um, Now with this point light, um, I can set this fall off distance to something other than 0, say 50, and fall off strength distance. Let's just, so you can kind of scale this up and you can see how the influence of it changes. And so this value controls how smooth that edge is. Like you can see how like it kind of fuzzes out, like it smooths out the fall off. So if this is 0, then it's just a hard fall off. You know, it's either on or off. If it's something else like 100, you know, you have something a little bit smoother. And then again, this works for any type of light. You can set this to a directional light. It'll do the same thing, where we'll have a limited influence. But if you set full strength distance to -1, it just affects everything. And this refresh lights button, if sometimes things don't update properly and this this, you can just click this. It won't actually check, but you click this and it just refreshes everything. It just reconstructs all the lights, all the cel shade lights in the scene. Um, I want to stress again the fact that these need to be on separate channels. Like, they won't automatically set themselves to separate channels. Like, the default is just 0. But if you have multiple of these in the scene, then they need to be on separate channels. Otherwise, they will cause problems for each other. So it's important to make sure that they are on separate channels if you have more than one in the scene. And you can actually control, so there are these channel options in the material instance. By default, the first 0 through 5 are checked, and then 6 and 7 are not, just to make it easier if you want to say, put something on a channel and have it only affect one specific thing, and then you don't have to go through all of your materials and uncheck a particular channel on something else, just to make it a little bit easier if you want cases like that. But otherwise, these are useful for making lights affect some things but not others, is all that's really for. Um, but for right now, we just kind of want them to affect everything. And so the shadows here, it's important to note, are actually cast by the default light that was already in the scene. And rotating this will rotate the direction that shadows are cast in. You know, um, so if you want, so you probably want your directional light and your cel shade directional light and your default Unreal directional light. If you want to have cast shadows, or you have non-cel shaded things in your scene, and then this is good for, you probably want these to have the same rotation, is what I'm saying. Or you can have them be different. If you want to do something stylized and have them be shaded differently, you can totally do that too. It just gives you a little bit more control over how you do that. um, I could even just for the heck of it, throw a shadow light in here and make this on channel 2. And why is this acting strange? Um, Wait, why is... I guess the fall off distance was making it weird. So now this shadow light is actually like affecting the shadow. You can, so these lights, you can use several in the same scene and they affect each other in different ways. This is a spotlight and a directional, and there's kind of, I mean, that's the gist of how to use this system, or at least for the cel shader aspect. Now, I guess I can go over the outlines that I'm sure a lot of people will want to know how to use. So there are actually a couple different types. The easiest one to use is this one here, the post-process outline. You just grab your post-process volume and see where here I just add it as an asset reference and put that in there. It builds, and why does it not look like it's showing up? We're not set to forward rendering, are we? No, we're not. I'm sorry, hold on here. Oh, there we go. I'm sorry, I had a few weird settings on that. There we go. Now it's kind of showing up now. You can see outlines, but unfortunately it's also throwing outlines on our skybox, which I think is why we had this that distance mask on. Custom depth. There we go. So now it just won't put outlines on things that are too far away, more than 50,000 units away. But now we just have this simple outline. It's not very controlled, like you can see it puts outlines on everything. This exclude custom depth and only custom depth, these options here, those are there for if we want to say, let's say I don't want an outline on this, right? I would find custom render custom depth pass. I could set that to true and then set exclude custom depth. And I would also need to do the same on the floor because that's what it's generating an outline with. And there, now we don't get an outline on this third person text, but we're still getting it on the character. Of course, if the character overlaps with the third person text, the outline will actually be slightly thinner. And the same goes with the floor. We're not really seeing an outline between the mannequin and the floor now, at least not as much. So the post-process outline, while simpler and easier to implement, is kind of harder to control in that regard, which is why I don't really like using it, but I included it because it's easier for most people to use. I mean, you can find lots of tutorials on YouTube and stuff about how to, even make this yourself. It's not that hard to make, but I just threw it in here, in case people wanted to just put it in their scene. The outline that I prefer using is it's called a hull outline, and it's basically just, I'm gonna go ahead and just remove uh, just delete that so we don't have that outline now. And the hull outline is a new mesh basically, depending on how you set it up. I have two materials for that. The one that requires less prep work is going to be this two-sided material. The main one expects you to actually have your outline as a part of the mesh. And if you haven't already set up your mesh that way, kind of a hacky workaround is to use this two-sided material. So what I can do is open up the blueprint of this guy, and just a easy way I do it is I can add another mesh, a skeletal mesh. Um, just set it to the same mesh here, but set the material as the outline two-sided. Well, let's not use the master as the instance. And then I can open that up. But first we want to set these master pose component, oops, of the this new skeletal mesh that we just added, and set it as the set the master as their base mesh. And now if we look at our viewport, now it has an outline. And this outline is actually a whole mesh. If you understand how normals work, normally you can only see a face from one side, so this basically just inverts the normals. So you're basically seeing the outline that you're seeing is an inside out mesh, just the same mesh, but inside out and with the faces moved along the normal direction to give it some line weight. And we can then go in here and tweak some properties of that outline. And you can like change the color. Let's say we want to have a colored outline. Now it's red. You can, of course, setting the brightness all the way to 0 will just make it black, but you can have it like glowing if you want to. Set that to like give that some brightness. You can even use a texture if you wanted to, and use this texture that I made as that texture, and then like lower the brightness or something if you wanted to. Okay, let's kind of fix the on this. Uh, let's actually, no, that was on the lights. I'm sorry. Let's just set these back to default colors so we have like more normal colors, and actually just disable that spotlight even. Disable the shadow light, and also change your shadow color back to the default. So now that's the more normal looking cel shaded effect, but now the outline, a little bit harder to tell, but the outline is actually his texture color. So if you wanted to, so this is like if you wanted the outline color to be just like a darker version of the base color, you could do something like this where you just use the same texture file. And actually, is that working right? I think so, yeah. So you can kind of see here where, sorry, it's a little bit difficult to really see clearly, but like how you can see the outline on his neck is the same, is like gets its same color from the neck color, and the outline of the face gets its color from the face. A little bit, yeah, that's a little bit darker and maybe easier to tell. So you can do things like that too with it. You just have more control with the whole outline, but it does also, double your geometry, so it's probably going to not perform super well if you have like really high poly meshes, because it's basically a duplicate mesh. We also have a few other settings here to play around with. I just give that a second to compile. But we do have a noise here. I can actually just disable that for right now. First, just to look at the line thickness. So we have our minimum line thickness, which you can have a really ridiculous value like that, or depending on how thick you want your lines. 0.1 is the default. I think that looks nice for the most part. But you can tell that it like doesn't completely, like, even when you get close, it stays relatively thin, and you get far away, it doesn't like completely fade out, just because like it's actually thicker when you're looking at it from farther away, and that's what this distance scale does. So you can have this set to 0, Um, so now the line is thinner, but also when you get far away, you basically can't see it at all. And so this 0.002, I think, kind of works well enough for that. You can use a bigger value, like say set that to 0.005, and you can see it gets much thicker as you zoom out. And as you like zoom in real close, it's the the difference between when you're zoomed in and when you're zoomed out is much more stark when you have that set to a higher value. But I just like to leave that at 0.002. And then noise you can have. Noise is nice for kind of a stylized effect, so you can sort of, it's easier to see if I have the brightness set to 0 here, and it gives kind of a like a weighted outline effect, and you can adjust that here to have the noise minimum, or even have that at 0, and then scale the noise more to have a more pronounced effect where it just varies the line weight more um, based on the UV. And you can have a different noise texture if you want. It just uses the Perlin noise by default, which works pretty well, I think. And you can even scale it if you really want to have it be more, have like a denser pattern or less dense, or just whatever you want to do with that. And you can even have it move. You have this noise speed option here. That's a little bit fast. It's neat if you want an effect like that. Maybe a subtle effect might be nicer, like this. Just there are options to play around with if you want to have this sort of effect. And I can even just run it like this. Oops. Didn't mean to do that. I can run it in-game like this, and you can just sort of see how it looks in motion. Actually, let's go ahead and change the anti-aliasing to FXA because I don't particularly like TAA. Looks a little bit better, I think. Might want to even turn off the motion blur. Just a personal preference. There. So that's kind of nice. Even full screen that just to get a better look at it. And these lights can totally be moved or rotated or whatever, like in real time, mid game. If you want to, these are just blueprints. Like you can totally just reference these as objects or like actors, and rotate them, do whatever you want with them. If so, they're movable. You can manipulate them mid game. All of these settings can be changed and updated in game if you want to. You just as blueprints, you can update their values. Trying to think if there's really anything else to go over here. I guess just a neat little effect I'd like to mention because I kind of like it. If I wanted to say go in here and let's just hide this for right now. Visibility rendering. Say I don't want to look at it. And no, there's no outline, but I want, say, Um, let's just throw a Fresnel on this. And you're about to see why I don't recommend using um, the full cell shade material if you don't need it, because it takes much longer to compile when you make these kinds of changes. And just give that a sec. Almost there. And there we go. So the Fresnel is a little bit hard to see right now, but it's there. I'm gonna even like increase the brightness just to make it much more apparent. But what we can do is set the oh, well, setting the Fresnel color to black kind of just turns it off. But you can actually set a negative value here, and this gives you almost an outline effect. It's kind of inky even, which might be cool depending on what sort of effect you're going for. It's even an easier outline solution than using like the hull outline with an entirely separate material. Um, it works very differently though, because like it's a Fresnel, it's based on face angle, whether or not it's there or not, and you can even like oops, I don't know what I did there. I think actually setting the brightness to, oh, that works. So you can actually use this brightness setting to kind of control how thick the outline is, but it still kind of fades. You should, um, yeah, you can kind of use the exponent too to control how sharp the line is. It's not super precise. Like, yeah, it's there. You can definitely tell that it's kind of has an outline effect. So that's just another option you have for an outline. And you can mess with that too. Some people might prefer this kind of effect over the other outline types. I think it's cool as more of like a kind of an inked feel, inked outline. Um, just mess with it if this is the sort of thing you want to experiment with. Oh, and you can have it use the normal map too, which again takes time to compile. So, I mean, again, there's probably more I could talk about with these settings and everything, but I try to make them a little bit self-explanatory, and there are these little notes over some of these settings that gives you a description of what they do. I'm not really going to play with a lot of these because, again, some of them turning them on or off does result in having to recompile part of the material, so it takes a while. I don't want to do that right now. And that's, again, why I recommend using the simple Cel Shader if you don't need any of these other settings. But, oh, wow, what happened here? That might actually be a little, not sure exactly why that's happening. I'll have to look into that later, but yeah, that's better. Anyway, that might actually be a bug. I'll probably have to look into why that happened and fix it. But Anyway, I think that's enough for this video. It gives enough of an overview of how to use this material. So, I mean, use this like this system. So I hope this helps, and have a good day. Bye.